Welcome back to Quick Theological Thoughts. I'm Howard Fisher, and in this episode, I want to interact with Bill Maher on Joe Rogan podcast. This is a clip taken from the Rubin Report. Dare I watch the Rubin Report? But every once in a while, I like to click in and see what's happening in the Rubin world. Anyway, he shares a clip, and I want to interact with Bill Maher's comments on the whole woke problem that's going on. So let's tune in and let's just interact. We'll start and stop as we go here.
If I said so many of the things that I've said on Club Random, on a podcast, on Real Time, on HBO, they would have had my head.
Yeah.
But somehow when I say it in the setting of the podcast, in my own home, blowing the pot smoke, somehow it's okay. And I find that very interesting.
I'm not sure why that's interesting. These people are inconsistent on all over the place. Bill Maher's inconsistent at this point. I'm not sure what that really has to. He's looking for consistency within himself. He thinks he's being consistent. Okay, fine.
I think they look at you like a guy who they're worried about because you don't toe the line.
They should be.
Yeah. So he doesn't toe the narrative. Okay. He's his own thinker. Fair enough. He's a well-read guy. But again, this is all that you're going to see the myth of neutrality flowing through this. He isn't. He's the objective one, right? Just we're the neutral ones. Everybody else has changed.
You're like a 90s liberal. You're like liberals back when they were more reasonable before they became leftists. And now every liberal kind of has to be a leftist. It's not if you want to be on the team, you got to subscribe to the most fringe ideas that the team is promoting.
This is the idea that that the 90s liberal has nothing to do with what's going on today. And I'm from New England. Long before I was ever became a Christian, conservative Christian, Bible-believing Christian, long before any of that, I remember liberals back then. And I remember I even made a joke back when I was in the 7th grade. And I think it was like 1982. And I made the joke that a guy friend of mine wanted a sex change because he wanted to become a lesbian. I didn't know anything about any of this stuff, but I could see the inconsistency of liberalism back then. There was no grounding, and people were doing all kinds of crazy things. I lived in New England. Everything was a go. But it made no sense to me. I remember even trying to go to more liberal churches, trying to understand what it is they had to say. What was the point? And I didn't have anything. And that was a real struggle for me growing up as a kid. Churches that claimed to be Christian, I just didn't get it. And the only one alternative that were Bible-believing Christians was this fundamentalist Baptist church, and I didn't want to have anything to do with them either. So I was kind of a kid stuck between a rock and a hard place, seeing everybody. Liberalism had no grounding, and I could see that.
And I get in trouble with that too. It's such a, I mean, there's so many, like Joe List has talked about that recently, the comic Joe List, very funny guy. And he was talking about I'm a 90s liberal. He goes, what? I didn't change. It's like everybody else kind of changed.
This is what I was trying to say, is that the 90s liberal didn't change. Everybody else changed. The argument I made as a Christian in the 90s against liberalism back then was that they were promoting homosexuality. And when I would say, look, the grounding for your argumentation is the same grounding for whatever other sexual deviancy you can come up with. And I was always being accused of, you're trying to say homosexuality is the same as whatever other sexual immorality you could come up with, pedophilia. How dare you? And I was like, I'm not saying they're the same thing. What I am saying is that they're grounded in the same thing. And so how do you, when it comes to transgenderism, which Bill Maher has kind of like looked around and said, this is kind of crazy because something has caused this, and it's not just, what did it? Well, hey, I was making that joke back in 1982.
Real weird, like what you're allowed to disagree with and not to disagree with, and it's
Yes.
strange.
I'm always trying to make the case.
They're acting like liberals were always open-minded. You were allowed to say anything you want, unless you were a conservative Christian. And now the woke people have come along, and you're allowed to say anything you want, as long as it agrees with them. There's nothing new here. this idea that Bill Maher was an open-minded 90s guy, yeah, he might have me come on his show and blather on with my Christianity, but you think he's open-minded to it? Whatever.
That liberal is a different animal than woke.
Yeah.
Because it is. And you can be woke with all the nonsense that now implies.
Yeah, you can be woke, but it's full of nonsense. Why? Because it doesn't agree with my 90s liberalism.
But don't say that somehow it's an extension of liberalism.
Right.
Because it's most often actually an undoing of liberalism.
I'm not saying it is an extension of liberalism. What I'm saying is it's an extension of the grounding that you guys are all standing on. And if you can say homosexuality or whatever you were going for back in the 90s is okay, by extension, on the same grounding, everything else is okay. Polyamory. Can you have a marriage with 20 people in it who are all loving and love each other equally? Is that a right or wrong? Is there any morality to that at all? Are you open-minded about that? Is there any restraint on the definition of marriage?
So you can have your points of view and your positions on these things, but don't try to piggyback on what I've always believed. I have always believed, as liberals do, for example, in a colorblind society, that the goal.
A colorblind society, I grew up with that. I wholeheartedly agree with that. But my grounding has become something other than the one that his is, right? Christianity is the grounding for that. We were all in the 90s and 80s and 70s when we grew up with that colorblind society where a man is judged. And that colorblind doesn't mean we don't recognize each other's ethnic cultures and that kind of thing. What that meant is that before the law, we're all standing on level ground, right? General equity. And liberalism was borrowing from Christianity to make that work. And so so even though we were a secular society, we were really borrowing from Christianity because that's what we were as a nation up until secularism took over. But to make secularism work, it's borrowing from Christianity.
Goal is to not see race at all anywhere for any reason.
Yes.
That's what liberals always believed all the way through Obama, going back.
All the way through Obama? You think Obama was a classical liberal? I don't think so. Is that my Home Alone look? I don't think so. He's as woke as the rest.
Back Kennedy, everybody, Martin Luther King. That's not what the woke believe. They believe race is first and foremost the thing you should always see everywhere, which I find interesting because that used to be the position of the Ku Klux Klan, that we see race first and foremost everywhere.
Yeah.
So again, you can have that position, but don't say that's a liberal position. You're doing something very different.
I think the idea behind it, I think I understand their idea. The idea is that the society is imbalanced. And so in order to address that imbalance, you're going to prop up as many minorities as possible, make as many opportunities for minorities as possible, and get it to a position where there are, like, white people are a minority. And so that's not a concern anymore. And that through that, somehow or another, you'll achieve equality.
So now we're talking about a neo-Marxist oppressor, oppression, oppressed society. We got to get rid of the oppressor, even though the oppressed are doing the very same sin that the oppressors are doing, because they can't sin, because by definition they don't have power, and if you don't have power, then you can't sin. Only the people in power can sin, and white people are in power. Right? It's just, we control everything, and you know, and whatever white is, right? There's a whole, the Italians are white, the Jews are white, everybody's white. The Asians are probably considered white. This is neo-Marxism, and neo-Marxism doesn't work where Christianity is thriving. And the reason why we're seeing all of this today, because we've had, decades and decades of secularism, and now the neo-Marxist underpinnings that we're going through, all of that have caught the generation that is fully not Christian, right? They don't have the foggiest idea of what Christianity is. So all of the things that we had that were Christian in our past, the restraints that were restraining our passions, our evil passions, our sinful passions, the things that would bridle us to keep us from going completely astray, those restraints are gone. That's where we're at. And so I think we'll just stop there. That's pretty much where we're at. And so we got to think about why Bill Maher is why does he believe that woke is wrong? Well, because it basically, woke is wrong because it doesn't agree with his position. But he can't explain why his position is right. He just puts down everybody else that disagrees with him in an open-minded and neutral way, of course, you see. And baloney. He's a secularist, and he can't begin to justify that. And so he just assumes his position's true. And because he's a comedian, he's very quick on his feet. He knows how to go after those who disagree with him with humor. And so he just belittles you with humor, right? So if I'm a Christian sitting on his show, he could come up with one joke after another, belittling Christianity, belittling my beliefs, and make himself look funny. All the while, he can't really justify his own position. And so just something to think about. It's we live in a world where secularism is ruling the day, but Christ is Lord. And he's using all of this for his purposes. Yes, Jesus can judge a nation with secularism. And we need to think about, as Christians, we need to think about what's being said here. How is this happening? How is the culture getting to where it's going? It's because of the underpinnings. It's because of the secularism that we've been indoctrinating our kids with for the last 60 years or 70 years or 80 years, however long it's been, really. And we brought this on ourselves as Christians. We're not being Christian in our own homes, in our families, in our extension, by extension, at work or at school or wherever. We need to get back to, as Christians, we need to get back to the basics of what it is we believe and why we believe it, and live it out. Live it out on a day-to-day basis in our homes if we want to turn all of this nonsense around, because Bill Maher's secularism, it cannot restrain what's happening. It just doesn't have the power to do so. In fact, it has the power to push it and make it worse. So anyway, those are my quick theological thoughts for the day. God bless. Be good.